Yes, we are ready. Over to you.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Hello, welcome to the first session of Media Literacy Talks held under the umbrella of the Journal of Media Literacy Studies. The Journal of Media Literacy Studies organizes Müktesebat Toplantıları as a series of meetings where academic and intellectual knowledge are presented, shared, and discussed. So today we're launching a new series of Müktesebat Toplantıları with the subtitle name Media Literacy Talks. And I am Gülden Demir. I'll be moderating this session. Thank you for being with us, joining us. Today we have a special guest, Marc Prensky. Marc is the founder and executive director of the Global Feature Education Foundation and Institute and the creator of the 2 Billion Kids project. He's an internationally acclaimed keynote speaker, author, visionary, and generator of new ideas, offering audiences new, better, and alternative ways for succeeding in the fast-changing 21st century world. And he speaks on a variety of topics related to young people and generational change. And Marc has spoken in almost 50 countries on 6 continents. So he's everywhere, literally he's everywhere throughout the world. And he has published 10 books, written over 200 essays and articles. And his writing has been translated into many languages, including Turkish. In Marc's book, let me show you this one, Education to Better Their World, Unleashing the Power of 21st Century Kids. This book won a Forward Indies Book of the Year Award Gold Prize. And one more thing, this is his latest book, 2022, last year. His latest book is Empowered, Reframing, Growing Up for a New Age. And in Turkey and throughout the world, Marc Prensky is best known for coining the terms digital native and digital immigrant. They are both in the Oxford Dictionary now. And you can read the Turkish translation of the article titled Digital Natives, Digital Immigrants in the second issue of our journal, the Journal of Media Literacy Studies. And in our next issue, we'll present the Turkish translation of second article by Marc Prensky, Digital Natives, Digital Immigrants. Do they really think differently? For you to read. And I'd like to talk about his career as a teacher, teaching at all levels. And he's been a professional musician and has acted on Broadway. We're going to talk to him today, but just be reminded that after this question and answer session, we'll have time QA. So please be sure to use the question and answer function in the chat. Just to drop some questions there, or you might simply use the microphone to ask your question. So, hello, Marc. Welcome to our session. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you. For the world, I'm Marc Prensky. I'm very happy to be here. I was just recently in Istanbul, and I got to experience and stay with Gülden and her family, and I really enjoyed my experience there. I was with my 18-year-old son, Sky, and he really loved it as well. So thank you for inviting me to talk. I don't have a presentation, but Gülden sent me some questions which I am prepared to answer, and I would really love to hear any questions that you have, because that's really why I am here, is to answer your questions. So let's get started.
Thank you, Marc. It was such a great pleasure to meet you in person, to host you here. So I want to start with actually how you got started. You have a background at science, then next move is career at teaching at all levels, then becoming founder of a video game development company. Can you tell us about this journey and the background of the concept of digital natives, digital immigrants, and how they are different?
Well, let me see if I can resume my journey as quickly as possible, because it's got a lot of varied paths. I grew up, and I'm perhaps older than I look, I grew up in the period right during when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, which was the first satellite in the world. And that put a huge pressure on the world and on my country to catch up in science. Somehow we got the idea that we were behind. So I was one of the first groups that was pushed hard into what's now called STEM, in science, technology, engineering, math. And I went through that for many years. I liked it and I did well in it. But I finally decided it was not going to be my profession. So when I was in university, when I was in college, I realized that I was much more interested in more general things in the world. I switched my major from chemistry to French. I then went and spent some time in France, and I loved Europe, and I had a very good time there. I came back and I had to have a job. The job that was available for me was teaching, and high school teaching in a really poor neighborhood of New York City called East Harlem. And I did that for 5 years. And that really got me into understanding and spending time with young people. And I really enjoyed that. That's really what I love most in the world. Sometimes people talk about a happy place. And whenever I think about going to my happy place, it's going to a room full of kids. So that's what I love. And I went through a lot of different things. I had learned music early, and so I became a professional musician for a while. But what I played was the classical guitar and the lute, the 16th century lute. So there was not a huge amount of demand for that. And I realized I would not ever earn a really good living playing that. So at one point, I decided to go to business school. And I was fortunate. I got into Harvard Business School. I went there. It was a very strange experience for somebody who had been in education and been a musician before. But I learned a lot. And what I mostly learned there was about something I now call reframing. I learned about seeing something, in that case, it was companies and industries, but it could be anything, from a very different perspective. And some people now refer to that as paradigms. And turns out I'm very good at doing that kind of thinking and seeing things in new ways. So what I've done recently is to bring this new reframing thinking into education and into thinking about what we all do, how we bring up our young people. And the world put together a system over the last several hundred years of education, which is really, I call it learning in advance. We take all our children, or as many as we can do this, we put them into classrooms, in groups with a teacher, and we try to get them to learn various parts of our background, of our history, of the information that humans have accumulated over all our years of existence. And there's a lot of that information, and it takes a very long time to get even some of it into there. And that's the way we operated until basically now we still operate that way. So if you have a child, you are in many places legally obligated to send that child to school for 6 years, or in some places 12 years, or in my case, 20 years, and spend their time learning before they make any real contributions to the world in terms of accomplishing anything or adding any value. So that's our system today. Learning in advance for years and years and years. And then when you finish your learning, when you finish your education, usually when you become an adult, then you get to start. Unfortunately, you have to start at the very bottom because you haven't done it before. You start in some profession or job. And what I looked at, that doesn't seem right to me. And it may have been right in terms of in the world where we couldn't get much information easily, where it wasn't available, we couldn't do much. And therefore, it made a whole lot of sense to put the young people into these classrooms and teach them things that would be helpful, like reading and writing and math. But that doesn't make sense anymore. And the time when I started to realize that things were changing was when I had my own little software company. We were making video games for corporate learning. It was called Games to Train. And I had a number of employees, and they were all considerably younger than me. They were typically in their late teens, early 20s. And when they had to do something, they did it in very different ways than I would do those same things. So, for example, if I didn't know something and I needed information, I would do research. I would go to the library. It was the very beginnings of the internet back then, but there wasn't really a whole lot that you could search. So mostly I would call people that I knew. And I knew people in a number of different fields, and I'd find an expert, and it would take me time, but I'd finally connect and usually get the information I needed. My employees did something very different. They took this rudimentary internet that they understood, that they had been part of, and they posted their questions in various forums that already existed at that time. And guess what? They would get an answer almost immediately. And it would come from lots of different people often. And it would be sometimes a better answer than I would have gotten, and certainly a faster answer than I would have gotten by my old methods of asking people. So I said, oh, well, that's something new. And then the more I looked at things, the more I saw that, well, this is happening in many different ways. They're not doing their writing or creating in the same ways that I would. They're not writing essays like I learned to do. They're making videos. They're making YouTubes. I remember one of my employees telling me, oh, there's this new thing called YouTube. You should check it out. I put my videos up on it. And so I saw things were changing. And in addition, I talked to a lot of parents, a lot of people who had kids and educators who were doing this. And they started having a feeling that things were different, that their young people were different in more than just the usual generational change ways, which were, okay, we're going to dress a little differently, we're going to use a little different slang and language. That had always happened. But now there were some bigger changes. Their kids were online, playing video games a lot of the time, and spending huge amounts of their time often doing this kind of thing. They wanted to connect when they could, or they wanted to be on their phones, which were just emerging, their smartphones. And so I saw something, I heard something continuously from people, and they didn't have a way to name it. They just said, our kids are strange. Strange things are happening. And so that's what led me to this idea, the concept that we were in essentially a new world. We were entering this new digital world, new digital culture, new digital, it started out as just a world of things that you could connect to. And that in that world, these were people who grew up with it. They were natives. They spoke it. It had been there ever since they were born or close to it. Whereas adults like me were people who had come to this world later on in our lives. So we were metaphorically immigrants in this new world. And so I wrote the piece, Digital Natives, Digital Immigrants, and the rest is, of course, history, and that's what Gülden just translated into Turkish after 20 years, and it was published in, I think, 2001. And let me just tell you a story, because this is a very important story. So I published this article. When I say published, I had a friend who had an online journal, academic journal called On the Horizon, and he said, okay, I'll publish that article. And he did. And this was just at the beginning of the internet, and online was not very big. And this was just the word I would use is obscure. It was not easy to find. And then one day I got an email and it said, hello, we are the Gifted Children's Association of New Zealand.
New Zealand.
New Zealand. We read your article in the newsletter of the Gifted Children's Association of Tasmania, which is an island south of Australia, another very remote place. Can we republish? I said, wow. Well, first, yes, of course you can republish. But what I suddenly realized is that the world was full of people who had suddenly become connected to all this information, who were searching for new ideas. And so they connected that, and I draw a straight line from there to the fact that Gülden just translated that article 20 years later or more than that people in places like Turkey are looking for new ideas and interested in hearing these things. And the world has changed a lot. We've gotten automatic translation in a lot of ways, but we still have people like you who are at this media literacy group who are trying to find these new ideas and communicate them to your own culture. And I think that's beautiful.
Thank you, Marc. It was such a privilege to listen to this story. So your articles that you mentioned were published in 2001, and just one term got my attention that you used as a reframing. So from this concept, I want to ask about what has changed so far, like since 2001. What about the changes that have occurred since then? Like what is different today? Like maybe we can think about 20th century education and 21st century education. What is different from 20th century education? Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Certainly. The changes, as I think most of us know, are profound. But the interesting part is that they're not on the surface. If I go to Istanbul, I can see the same buildings that have been there for hundreds, in some cases, maybe even thousands of years. I can go to homes. We live in the same homes. We go to the same buildings. We eat very similar food. So on the surface, not much has changed. But underneath, everything has changed. The infrastructure is what has changed. So in that time, since in the last 20, 23 years, say, since the turn of the millennium, the world has connected. The world has connected information so that pretty much anything that ever made it to print, and even a lot that didn't make it to print, that's in video and in sound and this, is available to anybody who has a device and is connected to the internet. And that has become something like 2/3 of the people on planet Earth. So while we still have work to do to connect some more people, this is really totally new that this information is available. Second, we have connected each other. So this is a great example that we're sitting here doing this. that I am now connected to people in Turkey and other places where I never could have been connected before. And I can call up people, I can connect to people, I can do it with people I've met already, but I continuously meet people that I have not met before, like Hedjatullah and things like that. And that makes it go further and further. So today, a young person, if they say that I want to connect with somebody, they can probably figure out a way to do that. And that has huge implications, which we can talk about in a minute. And then the third thing, and this is months old, is this new AI, this ChatGPT. Because what that does is it connects our thinking to all that information in a much more direct way, a different way, and in some sense an indirect way, because it does it statistically. And that's what ChatGPT does. It just puts things word after word statistically. But in doing that, it connects all the information that it was, quote, trained on, which is the whole internet. So if you ask a question about anything, you can ask a question of, tell me the history of this all through humanity, and it will tell you. And it isn't perfect. You need to fact check it like you do with people. But this is totally new. So we're living in a world that looks the same and tastes the same, but underneath is totally, totally different.
So it sounds like seeing things in a new way, maybe in a better way, in a more creative way.
Well, I would say that brings us back to reframing. And I would say that one of the things that happens with human beings is that they tend to fall into patterns of looking at things. And those patterns change over time. So at one point we were organized in terms of families, and then that got bigger and organized in terms of clans and tribes. And today we often look at things in terms of nation states. And that's a way to look at the world. And we say, okay, that given that we look at the world that way, here's what we can do, we can't do, we should do, we can think about. But often there are just totally different ways of thinking about the world. The same information, same world, but we look at it differently. A great example is gender. So we can say, well, we look at the world and we have men on one side or males on one side and females on the other side. And by the way, they have different roles and they have different things and different strands and all this kind of stuff. And that's the way it is. Or we can reframe and say, no, they are both people, have different reproductive functions, but there's no reason necessarily to see them as different. And that's just a totally reframing. And we're going through that in so many ways in the world. We're going through that with LGBTQ. We're going through that with what you can, drugs you can take, whether marijuana is a good legal drug or an illegal drug. We're going through a lot of reframings. And once you see the world in a new way, it's very hard to go back to the old way. You may accept it, you may not accept it, but you now see the world in two ways. And it's very much like the optical illusions that we all know, where you can see either two faces facing each other, or you can see a jug, depending on whether you're looking at the white or the black. And once you see both, you can't see them both at once. It's very hard, but you can switch back and forth really easily and you can't go back. So that's what really is going on now. And I think the business or the struggle or the effort that we're all in together is trying to take people who see things only one way, for very good reasons, because they grew up, the world was that way, their world was that way. And we're trying to show them that they can look at the world in a different way. And if they do that, it has different implications for what they will do, what they will say, how they will live, etc. Many huge implications. So that's really what we're doing here. That's what you guys are doing with your journal. That's what we are all trying to say. Well, you don't have to agree with us, but listen up, because there's another way to look at this.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Marc. You highlighted some significant differences here. So I'd like to move on to another specific question, but I must say, I was born in 1987. I've been teaching experience for more than 15 years. So I'm kind of digital immigrant, trying to figure out what is going on, like in the new world, in this new digital age, and struggling with the things and trying to learn some new ways to understand the language of our students. I'd like to ask you this specific question because it's kind of a handicap for young people. What levels are given to young people by the adults because they experience the world before them? What about the levels given to young people by the adults, parents, teachers, and educators? What is a young people's handicap here?
I like that question. The labeling is something that humans do. It's very important. In fact, most of education is really about nomenclature. It's really about giving different names to phenomena that we see in the world, so that we can talk about them, so we can distinguish them. So there's nothing wrong with putting labels on things, except when that label makes assumptions, carries assumptions that are not valid. Mm-hmm. So the one thing that has been relatively constant over a very long period of human history is that change has been slow. And there was always change, and new things always happened, and we invented fire, and we tamed animals, and we got agriculture, and we got all the things, we got printing, and many things that we got over time, but it came all very slowly. So the expectation was that things would more or less remain the same from generation to generation. If you were a young person, you would grow up and you would fill a role that already existed somewhere in the world when that person got old and passed away. So we would have whatever they are, everything from doctors to teachers to parents. It was replacement. It was a world of replacement because we had finite lives. We had to replace ourselves. And so what was the goal of the adults? Well, they wanted to be well replaced. They said, our young people should grow up to be people like us. Because look at how good we were. We did really well, so they should be people like us. I used to call them little us's. And that's what we did. And that's why we put them through all this school and training, and that started way back when parents and masters would train some kid to do the family business or to make something or to do this. Well, that started to change when this digital world started appearing, because it was moving so much faster. It was moving at a speed where something that was true or good or the best one year could totally disappear the next year. And I don't know if any of you remember the thing called the BlackBerry, which at one point was the greatest device in the world. And suddenly something else came out that was better, like the iPhone or the smartphone, and it was, it disappeared. So the pace of change started increasingly, incredibly rapidly. And Ray Kurzweil and others talk about the exponential curve and how if you were to put coins on a chessboard, for example, and just double one coin on the first square, 2 coins, 4 coins, 8 coins, 16 coins, you start out with not that many coins, but by the end of the board, you have more coins than there are things in the world. You have this enormous number, and that's called exponential growth. One example is doubling every period. So that's what started happening in many ways, that we started seeing it in computer chips and Moore's law, and things started changing a lot more rapidly, which meant that things that were very important to a generation might not be as important to the next generation.
Mhm.
And one of the great examples for me as a father was watching my son grow up and teaching him something that I had learned. When you meet somebody new, you look them in the eye and you shake their hand. And he didn't want to do that. And he still doesn't do that unless he's forced or he understands or I tell him in advance. He doesn't look people in the eye. He looks at people on the screen mostly. And so it's things change that were very important at one point, change when it comes to the next thing. Now, that it means we have to bring up our kids in function of the world that they're going to live in. If they were going to live in our world, essentially, with a few modifications and changes, maybe even cars instead of horses, we could deal with that. It was a slow change. Now they are already starting to live in a world that changes much faster than humans are used to or comfortable with changing. And humans don't really enjoy changing. They're very adaptable. That is an interesting paradox, because humans are very adaptable, but changing something that you've done for a long time that you feel like is part of you or something you like is very hard. And it typically only happens when you're pushed, when you feel a crisis, when something is going on that makes you want to change. And one of the words we use for that is comfort zone. People have a comfort zone. It's hard to get them to move out of their comfort zone in many times. So that's what's happening with regard, in my view, to education.
Mhm.
We have been very comfortable for a very long time, for at least 100, maybe a couple of 100 years, with a system that says, okay, if you want your kids to be like you and you want them to be slightly better, maybe rise a little higher in the hierarchy, you send them to school. You teach them what we knew, what we know as humans about organization, about writing, about how the world is, about geography, about math, about all these kind of things, because that will, if they do well in that, that will make them humans like us, worthy of replacing us, advancing our civilization perhaps slightly. And that worked. I don't think that works anymore. I think that is the huge change, because the world, and again, it's not the world on the surface, it's the world underneath, will be so different in the period, even today, but certainly in the next 50, 100 years, which is when these kids in school today are going to live. The world will be so different that the old methods of preparing them are almost useless.
Mhm.
And they are feeling it, because there's so many young people in the world who are just disaffected. There's much stronger words than that, but disaffected with school and say, this just doesn't apply to me. Why am I here? And the reason you're here is because three big reasons, actually. One is that you're legally required to be here. Two is that your parents need a place to put you so that they know you're safe while they go off and work. And the third is so employers, this is called signaling. So when you actually finish this and go look for a job, your employer will know that you can actually do something that is a little bit complex, but more importantly, that you can do things that you don't want to do, but they want you to do. That is the biggest signal of education. And most of education is not stuff we want to do yet. I hope that will change. It's stuff we don't want to do, but we're told to do. And we do it, and we're rewarded with grades or smiles or pats on the head or whatever we're rewarded with. But it's indoctrination to how culture works.
Mm-hmm.
That's changing.
I think it was important to underline the assumptions of the adults, like they experienced the world before us and offering some frames, some guidelines on how to live, and and young people and children, they are resisting, like not accepting their stock of knowledge, like because they experience something new, because we know that and also what I understood from your example of Sky saying no, we know that this digital age has changed the way people communicate. So they have been experiencing something new, and I want to ask my question here on the future relationship between teacher and students, parents and children, especially in this context, like in the context of intergenerational communication. What would you say?
It's really important because people are struggling with it. And it's something that is worldwide. It is, you hear the same things, the same arguments, the same complaints, everywhere you go, everywhere I go, and I go to a lot of places, or I used to go to even more, but now I still go to places that I haven't been, and I hear the same struggles. And the struggles are, we think these particular sets of things are important. They're important for our culture. They're important for your growing up and being successful, which is what parents want for their kids. They're important for the continuation of society as we know it and like it. And that's the important thing. We like it. So we want that to continue. And in order to do that, we have always controlled young people in many ways. And it's the technical term for that is enculturation. Parents teach the rules of the culture to their little kids. You do this, you don't do this, you take off your shoes, you don't take off your shoes, you do this in public, you don't do that in public, those rules. Then religion teaches another set of rules. You need to do this on these days, you need to not do this on these days, you need to behave and say certain kinds of things. And finally, school is really there to control people by teaching them all the rules that they have to follow and the things they should do. So it's really been a system of control, but it was a system in a sense that paid off. It was a system that said, well, if you follow these rules, you might actually become president of Turkey, or you might actually become, what you want to be, or an academician, or all these kind of things, because that's the path. That is so different now. And the thing that's interesting is that none of us really know the exact path. And it used to be, okay, the adults knew the path. They had been through this path. They'd been on it. They'd seen the pitfalls. They'd seen what happens if you don't study hard, or you don't go to school every day, or you don't do this. And they've seen the charts that say, well, if you do go to school for so many years, your income is likely statistically to be $1 million higher, or whatever it is. We all knew that stuff. That's not true anymore. necessarily. So, and the young people feel this, I think, instinctive. I don't know the right word to use, but they understand it just in the same way that my son, Sky, again, I'm going to talk about something I know, who just graduated from literally the high school ranked #1 academically in California for public schools. It's #1. Everybody knows that if you mention the name of his high school, you know, it's worth something. It's #1. He hated it. He thought it was just totally irrelevant, with a few exceptions, but mostly he's never, ever wants to set foot back there. And what they did mostly was stress him out. What they did mostly was say, well, if you don't do this stuff, we won't give you the grades, and there you won't get into the right college, and you won't have the right life that you want to have. Well, he will, and he'll decide it on his own. And more young people are figuring that out, that I have to forge a new path in this new world. And the most interesting part of this is that we've just entered, this is the exciting, that just when we were kind of thinking, well, I don't know, are we really immigrants? Do older people know a little bit about technology and younger people don't know enough and whatever, we suddenly get this AI. And here we're all immigrants. Everybody's an immigrant because it hasn't existed. And, you know, it's only technology if it was created after you were born, and we were all born, the technology shows up, it's technology, it's new, it's a new world. And we're all struggling with how to do it. What do we do with it? What's good? What's bad? What's good about it? Where does it help in the things we used to do? Where does it help us do new things? And that is a huge opportunity for just what we were talking about, for generations to work together. Because it should be, at least theoretically. Because ideally, well, people who have lived a life have learned a set of things. They've said, well, they have some thinking about, if you do this, this will happen. They've learned about some consequences. Some of those are probably still true. Many of them. Some of them are not. So what we have to now recalibrate is, what are the consequences of different kinds of actions? Mm-hmm. That's the big recalibration that has to go on in humanity. And if you if you take the adults alone, they will tell you, because they know what the consequences are of every little thing you do, because we've had so much experience. The young people, of course, know nothing about it because they haven't done very much, but they're starting to see, if they do this, say with a tool they have, you know, the young people like my son began using ChatGPT in school the very first day it appeared. And the consequences, you know, they discovered the consequences. Sometimes you get away with it if you do this or that. Sometimes they you know, hold you by the collar and tell you you're plagiarizing. They're starting to figure out what those consequences are of living in the world with the affordances, with the things they now have. Mm-hmm. And it would be nice if we did that together without judgment. That's a very hard thing to do. That's why we're struggling, because there's a lot of judgment from people who claim they have experience. And they do have experience, of course. If you've lived for, you know, 80 years, you have 80 years of experience. Is it relevant experience? Mm-hmm. Where is it relevant experience? It may be relevant experience in experiencing how your body changes as you age, yes, but it may not be relevant experience in figuring out what's the best way to find something out or get something done or connect with other people or do this. So again, I think that's a great word, and I haven't ever used it before, but I think it's really important that we are recalibrating. Mm-hmm. We are just recalibrating, and specifically what we are recalibrating is the effects of actions.
Thank you so much, Mark. Seems like, unfortunately, we have some problems on there, like still individual differences are not taken into consideration, and the teachers using the same language and the same, maybe not updated prompts they bring in when they go into the class, and seems like most of the teachers are still struggling with this digital words, like the new tools, I mean. So I want to ask about your recommendation. What would you suggest us, like parents, teachers, educators, you can take it, to use these significant differences to our advantage? What should we do?
Thank you for asking that. I think it's really important that we figure it out. I have always thought that the most important thing to do is to watch and listen. And that is something we're not particularly good at with our own children, with our own students, because we think we know the answers. So why should we watch them struggle like we did the struggle, et cetera, et cetera? But unless you watch and listen carefully, you will never know that changes are taking place, and you will never know how to address them. And so, but it's a struggle. I struggle with this every day. My son tells me, I give him lectures, which I do. And he said, you should listen more. And I have to every day. I said, well, okay, I'm going to listen more. I'm going to really try to do that. And what we're listening for is, what are their goals? What do they want? And do we think those are good? Do we want to help them reach those goals? And hopefully in many cases we do. And if we do, what are the best ways to do that? So for example, one of the things that often gets asked of kids, at least in my part of the world, is you meet a new, the kid of somebody you know, and you say, oh, hi, what's your favorite subject in school? That's 5 choices. That's like a 5-choice multiple choice test. No, they might be not interested in any of that stuff. The amounts of things that you can be interested in the world are in the billions. So why should we limit them to 5? And we have to learn to listen in that more nuanced way, ask the questions that bring out this stuff. So for example, when I used to ask kids, well, suddenly passion became a big deal in the world. What's your passion? Follow your passion. And so we would ask, the teachers would ask kids, what's your passion? They would say, I don't know. And what do you do when they say, I don't know? Well, you have to follow up. You have to, my follow-ups were things like, well, what do you watch on YouTube? What do you do? What would you do with your free time if you had nothing to do, and if it's sleep, okay. But that's maybe what you're interested in right now because you're too stressed out to do anything else. We have to be much more open to a variety of things. And I put things into 3 categories when I talk to young people. I say, well, here's 3 things that I can help you with. Do you want to realize a dream? Do you have a dream where you say, gee, I would really love to see this. I think we can desalinate water. I think we can bring people together. I think we can do, okay, we can focus on helping you realize your dream. Second thing is, are there problems you see that you care about? And every single young person sees they just have to walk out their door or wake up and not even walk out the door, and they see tons of problems. And some of them they'll care about, and some of them they won't care about. And so which ones do you care about? Okay, we can work on fixing them. And then the third one is, who do you want to help? So most people have a group of people. It could be their family, it could be their religion, it could be anything they want to help. Some people want to help people who are not human, like animals, right? Or I call them people who are not beings who are not human, like animals. So once you start probing in those ways, you start understanding who they are as individuals, and then how to help them. And there's a new thing that a friend of mine has been talking about that I think is really important here, that has come into the world, that's called, the term is affinity groups. And it's a little bit of a technical term, but it means we used to have communities. First, they were based on where you lived. And there's still communities based on where you lived. And then they got a little broader. They were based, say, on a religion, on certain things that you shared. That was a community, etc. But now there are these things, affinity groups, which say, what are you interested in? What do you care about? I don't care who you are, what you look like, where you live in the world, what your age is. If you and I are both interested in the same thing, we can share something about that. We can learn from each other. We can work together. We don't have to say, are you a member of my group or not? You know, I can't work with you because you don't share my nationality, or you don't share my religion, or you don't share my philosophy. We can leave all that stuff out and just say, are we interested in the same thing? Do we have an affinity? Are we an affinity group? And the wonderful line from my friend who talks about this stuff was, he said, with the internet, everybody can now find the group in the world in which they're in the top 10%. So nobody has to be at the bottom. There's some group of people who have similar interests in which they know more than other people, or they're better at something than other people. And that's a very positive thing. So I think a huge opportunity is to connect across the generations in affinity groups. And this is happening. It's certainly happening in the games world. That's kind of where this whole thing got started, because adults played games and young people played games. And it happened on the internet because, as the old joke says, on the internet, nobody knows if you're a dog, right? Nobody knows anything except what comes out of the internet about you. And that has good and bad. I mean, you can fake things, you can fool people, you can in negative ways, but it's mostly, it has so much huge positive things that's where we should put a lot of our focus. So a couple of other things that I thought of. Adults, if you're like me, if you're an adult like me, you like to teach, right? And probably in this group, we like to teach. If my son asks me a question, I'll give him a lecture for as long as I, can go on until he'll stop me. It's something that a lot of humans have. We like to teach. The trouble with that, and so that's how we run our education system. We run it through teaching, direct instruction. We put a group of people in front of us, or at best one-to-one, and we teach them. Well, direct instruction is great. It works. But it only works if the people being instructed ask for that instruction, if they want that instruction. If you say, look, I want to ride a bike, teach me how to ride a bike, then you're going to pay attention. But if you say, if you're a parent and said, you're a kid and you need to learn to ride a bike, and just like happened with my kid in swimming, right? I found out years later that he hated the swimming lessons he took. He did them. I forced him to do them. It's good that he knows how to swim. He'll be a safer person in the water. But that instruction was not well received or happily received. So if we're going to teach people, we really need to help them to their goals. And that really makes us much more coaches and mentors and advisors than teachers. And, when you're a teacher, what's your curriculum? Okay, let's get it out there into their heads. People don't necessarily want it in their heads. And that's a real issue that education is struggling with now. It's a real huge generation. We have a huge worldwide system of educators who are very good in many cases at putting things into kids' heads and teaching. And they'll tell you, oh, the best teacher, and we have some great teachers. Well, that means zero if people don't want to learn the stuff. But then there's an even bigger problem, because why do they want to learn stuff? How do we, and we have all these discussions in education about motivation and how do we motivate our kids to learn this stuff? And there's only one way, and that is for them to have something that they want to accomplish for which this information or skill is useful. Mm-hmm. And they have to realize that. So, which leads me to say, we made a mistake for good reasons, but we made a mistake in making our education, our system for bringing up people, about teaching and learning. And don't tell that to educators, because that's their whole lives, but that is a mistake. What we should do is base it on accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And that the teaching and learning should be a byproduct of that. When you need it, you get it. Mm-hmm. But it shouldn't be the goal. And if you go to almost any academic institution or school in the world today, they'll tell you their job is learning, or teaching and learning in some cases. But they all talk about learning, our lifelong learning. How do we learn? What's the best way to learn? Do we forget our learning over the summer? It all becomes about learning. Well, no, it doesn't. I don't think that's going to help much in the future, because it's all there. You can learn it right in your pocket when you need it. So I try to build this world, hopefully bring up young people on real world accomplishment, on realizing dreams, on fixing problems, on helping other people, and hopefully we'll get there.
Hope so. Marc, seems like connecting to young people and children is not enough to have a broad understanding on their perspective, their experiences. I think we have to change the language that we use, and we need to try some creative ideas you have just offered us. I think so. And thank you so much for this. And right now we'll move into the questions. Please remember to drop questions in the Q&A function or the chat, or you can simply use your microphone to ask the question.
Access the chat. I can only get involved by listening. Great organization. Greetings. Thank you. That's Bilge. Is that how you say the name? B-I-L-E.
Yeah, that is true. Bilge is perfect. Thank you for your lively and educational speech. Thank you so much. I like it. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your all experiences with us. Actually, I have a question. Can I ask it? Thank you so much. I am sure that almost everybody mentioning that there is a big critique about the concept of generations. It's the basic critique, maybe, that it says that this kind of terms, what I mean, the generations, overly simplistic and reductive, and they assume that individuals born with a certain period share the same behaviors and values and experiences. Saying it is a little bit, simplistic, because some people believe that in reality, people's experiences are shaped by other kind of factors, like such race and gender and socioeconomic statuses and cultural environment, and also the place you burn. Even you burn in United States and you burn in Turkey, it's different. Burning in different countries also affect your behaviors and experiences. So, for not trivializing the generation studies, but for expanding them, what kind of questions should be at the generation research, future generation research for over coming this kind of critics, maybe? Thank you.
Thank you, Bilge. That's an excellent question. So when academics have a lot of barbs that they can use to put down ideas, and one of them is simplistic, and so what the term that I would use is can we make any useful generalizations? And obviously this is every individual is different in the world, and we're different not just because how we look, but the most important difference I think now, I just recently realized this, is the choices that we make, the things that we do in life. So what your personal projects are that eventually become your resume when you pass, that is your individuality. The question, of course, people are going to be different. They're going to be different in every family. They're going to be different in every country, in culture and religion. There's going to be lots and lots of differences. What I'm looking for is, are there commonalities? And are those commonalities different in one generation to the next generation? And the only reason they would be different is because the environment has changed. So you'll hear people who say, well, it's idiocy to keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. Some people define that, call that the definition of idiocy. But that's not true when things are changing. So that's only true when the environment stays exactly the same. And then if you do the same thing in that environment, you're more than likely going to have exactly the same results. But when the environment totally changes, you'll have different results. So take going to university, for example. In the past several generations, going to university was a big plus. It would gain you a lot of entry, and the better university you went to, the better it was. And you could pretty much count on that. You can't anymore. And that's what's kind of changing. So my son is taking a gap year before he goes to college. And I think he'll go on, but he might choose not to. Or Bill Gates dropped out of college and became one of the richest people in the world, or the environment has changed so that people expect different things. Google used to hire people by looking at their resume. Now it doesn't care if you have a degree, it doesn't care. It just, can you get things done? That's what they need to know. So as the environment changes, your generalizations, and remember, these are still generalizations, of what might be universally different, change. So are kids on different continents different because of their upbringing? Of course they are. Do they all play, or many of them play, the same video games and play them together? Yes, many of them do. And if enough of them do, that really changes the environment that they know and they grow up in. So if they do that, for example, and have what we're starting to see more and more, which is simultaneous translation, so that you play the game, you say something in Turkish and it comes out in English or French or something on the other side, suddenly that's a different world. And you can't assume in that world that learning a foreign language is as valuable as it might have been in the past. And those kind of changes are happening at an unbelievable pace. Math is another good example. It used to be you had to memorize a lot of stuff. People used to memorize multiplication tables up to 20 and 30 and 40. Then that became less important, but you still had to calculate by hand. You still had to know long division and all this kind of stuff. Then the calculators came out and that became unimportant. Now we have this thing called Mathematica, which will do the most complicated mathematical calculations that could possibly exist. and it'll do them very quickly. And so we now have to say, well, okay, so what's still important? Well, maybe understanding how to set up a mathematical calculation, maybe expressing something clearly so that it can be well translated into the other languages. But these things that were very human change. And my biggest point that I'm thinking about now is that some very, very fundamental things to human culture are changing. One of them is property, right? As soon as property becomes intellectual, we have to make different kinds of rules for it. And, you know, plagiarism, which was a sin in the 20th century, may be less of a sin in the 21st. Who knows? So property is changing in the intellectual world. Privacy, certainly changing. We can still have physical privacy if we hide behind something, but our information is no longer private. Anything that goes online as information can somehow be found. And the third is identity, because we don't even know whether we're real or fake when we see each other online. That obviously that hasn't gone as far as it will. But, you know, if I were to see any of you up there, you could just as soon be an avatar, and it could be a totally different person speaking through your face with your voice. That's what we can do now. So identity, privacy, and property are all going through huge changes. And boy, if you don't think civilization's going to be different, then we disagree.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Thank you.
It seems like we have more questions by Firuze Selen.
Thank you in advance. I would like to say that I'm an avid advocate of native-born digitals, and I have been working as a research assistant in the universities for about like 8.5 years, and I got the chance to work with those generations face-to-face in my daily life. But recently, while I was working on my PhD thesis, during my interviews, I realized that the biggest problem I have with them, I'm a late millennial, so the biggest problem was they lose the cause-effect connection in their minds. I mean, what I observe is they can research even quicker than I can do by using different apps, different algorithms, whatever. But they can't make the connection between, they can't think out of the box in a classical way. And it was pretty hard for me to ask my questions and get the answers that I need for my project. What I want to pick your mind is, what do you think that in a philosophical mind, should we teach them that kind of cause and effects connection, or should we simply skip that part of the world history? Or basically, what do you think about that? Your observations.
Thank you for that question. It's a really important question, and certainly on many people's minds. So in a sense, it goes back to what I said before about recalibration. So suddenly some part of the equation becomes really easy and even trivial, like information, just like calculation now has become easy and trivial. So what does that mean? Does that mean we now got to put more focus on the parts that are not trivial? Perhaps. And so that one thing is just to say what needs more attention. And you pointed out, does critical thinking, does logical thinking, do these things that have been important to humans in the past, what importance do they still have? And how do we do them? And how do we maintain that? The second thing is, what new things are there? In other words, critical thinking and logic and this connections go only so far. They they are, you take, for example, the scientific method. The scientific method means you have to look at things, you think critically, you enter it with a critical mind, and you need proof and all that. That stuff I think is still good. But what constitutes proof is now really changing, and you typically have to enter the scientific method with an opinion, with a hypothesis. You have to say, oh, I thought that this might be true or might not be true, and then you test that. People are now saying, no, wait, now that we can look at so much more data in the world, let's not make a hypothesis. Let's just look at the data and see what emerges. And that's a different way of doing it. It really is a fundamentally different way of looking at the world. So the question is really what critical thinking means. When you say that, what do you mean? Do you mean logical? Do you mean syllogism? Do you mean doubt? There's a lot of things that go into what we call critical thinking. Which one of those do we still need? I still want my kid, I talk to him all the time about being skeptical. I say, you read something, don't believe. He said, I read this on the internet. Okay, you did read it on the internet, but is it true? Do you think and he will be more accepting of some of these things than I would be, less of a skeptic. So that kind of skepticism, I think, is really important, particularly in an age of memes, because we're in this age of memes where something that somebody says can get, pushed around and accepted. And is it a war, or is it a special military operation, right? Well, it kind of depends on who says it the loudest, right? In our world, in a lot of ways. And so we're in a very interesting calibration period. And I think that a very interesting focus of research might be to deconstruct critical thinking, because it's got this terrible overall thing. Critical thinking is good, non-critical thinking is bad, blah, blah, blah. No, let's deconstruct. Let's say what is essential, what's less essential, what's impossible, right? Certain things we just can't know. We can't know everything. We can't predict human beings because they're too complicated. So that would, I think, to the extent that people like you are going to do research, that would be a very useful thing to do.
Thank you, Marc. I think we have one more question. Serkan.
Thank you very much. And thank you again, Marc. And I want to ask a question about what do you think about the future of the academia, especially after the ChatGPT or AI? Because before digitalization, you are going to libraries, especially physically, and then we are going to digital libraries or databases, but we spent time, we spent effort to write an essay or to write an article, what else. But now we can also, our students directly go to the ChatGPT and they can create an article. So what do you think about the future of academics, especially in social sciences, with AI? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. It's clearly changing, and it's going to change. It needs to, and it's not just the AI. The AI is just perhaps the latest straw, and maybe it's, as the saying goes, the straw that broke the camel's back. But it's been suffering for a long time because for me, that there's a value, a great value for people coming together around thinking and knowledge. Okay, that is, and that's how academia started, right? Everybody was off doing something, and some people said, no, we really need to think about stuff. And so Socrates formed people to think about stuff with him, and people formed academies, and they became schools. And then thinking took over everything. And so somehow academics captured, I call it hijacked, the kids, the young kids. And so when my kid was in 3rd grade, they were teaching him to footnote. And that's, it's like, why? And academic skills and plagiarism and all these kind of things and that's fine. You can have that world. That's an affinity group. If you want to be in that affinity group, you should. But whether you need to apprentice everybody in the world in that affinity group in order to have them grow up and be good people, I don't think is true. I think what is a much more effective way of growing up is to have them do projects that make an impact on their world, and a positive impact. And by doing that, they will discover plenty of things that they want to learn about, that they want to know more about. But it's so silly that you would have a school or a university in a particular place, and that place wouldn't be getting any better. In fact, in some places, the school or the university will be the only oasis of goodness in a terrible place. So that's not the way I would like to see the world. I would like to see the world that if people come together and they want to improve gradually their skills and their ability to get things done, it should be constantly visible that they are doing that. And that the focus only on thinking and learning, and especially going back to the previous question, in very particular ways, because there are forms of thinking that are permissible in academia, and there are forms of thinking that are not permissible in academia. So it's limited in some ways, and I think that's limited.
Thank you so much, Marc. So let me check if any questions dropped in the chat. No. Do we have any more questions from the audiences? Okay. Marc, do you have any additional thoughts that, okay.
Gülden Hocam,
Yes.
if you let me, maybe I can ask a question.
Sure.
With your permission. Mike, thank you very much. For me, it's an invitation to think everything, rethink. Thank you very much for this talk and accepting our invitation. Actually, you answered question that I'm going to ask maybe about the institution, educational institution, education system. Neil Postman, American professor, wrote a book published in 1990, yes, The End of Education. With that book, he started to write in 1979, the same year that Pink Floyd song Another Brick in the Wall appeared on stage. And we have been witnessing many criticism of modern education system, even harsh criticism. Also, I want to mention one more book and writer as well, John Tyler Gatter's Weapons of Mass Instruction. Also, this book translated in Turkish as Education as Mass Weapon Destruction.
Right, that's what in the book is, education.
Education as
whatever, weapons of mass instruction, I think.
Yes.
So yes.
Education as a weapon of mass destruction. The title of Turkish version. And we witnessing transformational change, structural transformations, actually institutional. Established institution, you mentioned that don't work that institution actually anymore. And what do you see the future of education system, especially school, teaching system. I'm not talking about the social system, actually, as institution, school as an institution. Are we going to see the end of system or establish a new one? Can I take your opinion or your prediction on that specific discussion and issue? Thank you very much.
As we say, can you take it to the bank, which is another institution? Can you take my ideas to the bank? There are a lot of things to say. First of all, we have institutions of all kinds to perpetuate what we have. That's the reason we have the institutions of government, is so that they will continue even though we get replaced every generation, right? And the reasons we have all our institutions, that's what institutions do. They preserve something continuously as humans constantly revolve and change and cycle through, right? That's I think the purpose of institutions, whether they're governments, whether they're libraries, whether they're academic, whether they're schools. So, and so that's one thing. That's why we have them. So they are instruments of stability, right, over time. And the second thing that now I've forgotten this this second really important point. Hang on. So that first point goes back to the fact of, do we need stability? How much do we want and need it, right? And to the extent that we want it, then, you know, we have it. And if you send your kids through these institutions. Oh, and the second point is that nothing ever completely disappears. So there are still people in the world, I once read, who are making flint arrowheads like the prehistoric people do. They for whatever purposes they're doing it. Nothing goes away. It just goes into smaller and smaller niches, and new things become mainstream. And what I think the situation that we're in today is that something became mainstream for a very good reason, and it became really mainstream. I mean, there's no country in the world that doesn't do education. We really complain about the poor people who are left out of the education system, and we work hard to bring them back into the education system. So this became a very big deal in the world for continuity. And now, because the world is changing, the real question is that the continuity we want? Do we really want people coming out with degrees and doing this kind of stuff and being the people that we know how to produce, which we do, right? So Hedyatala knew how to produce a gulden, right? And you did, and you produced a beautiful one and a very good one. But now she is fulfilling the same role as being a teacher in academia. And so is that continuity something that we want? And my sense is, yeah, some of us do, and we do, and there are good reasons for that. At the same time, I think we need something else alongside it. And so I don't, when people talk about the future of education, and a lot of people talk about this, and I was just thinking about this today, I don't really care. Because education's future is just going to be another variant on what we do now. You know, maybe you'll do your research using AI and not going to the library. Maybe you'll do this. That's because education is not in individuals' minds, but as an institution is defined. It's there. We know what it is. It's kids showing up and being trained by adults who have their own training, right? Or however you want to describe it. It's everywhere exactly the same. So I don't care about the future of education. It will evolve, absolutely. I care about the future of preparing kids, of bringing kids from being born to being adults as useful people in the world, or not just useful, but able to accomplish the most or flourish or add the most value or whatever whatever you want to call what you think people should do decides exist. And I don't think that the education system does that well anymore. And might do it well for some. And it might be fine. And those people will continue to go through it and become teachers and perpetuate that system. And they are doing that. But for the more and more people, and I have no numbers here, but for more and more people, it's not becoming relevant to their growing up and making whatever impact they want to make on the world. It's only becoming relevant when they need it. It's only becoming relevant when they say, oh, I don't know how to do this, I need to learn. And what do we have now? We go to YouTube, right? We have this thing called YouTube. So if there's a skill you're missing, right? Say, how do I do this in some program online or so? You just go to YouTube. That's all you have to do, and you can choose from people in all over the world telling you how to do it. And if you forget that, then you struggle like sometimes I do. My son never forgets it, right? And that's why he's, in a sense, a native, because he knows where he will go to do certain kinds of things. And I instinctively still want to go to the library, right? Because how many years did I go to the library? And, it's harder and harder. And I forget that the library is in my pocket. The library is at my voice command. The library is just asking a goddamn question. And excuse the language, but that's so for advancing understanding and it turns out it's more and more obscure ways, but some of those ways become very useful, inventing graphene, a new building material that's going to revolutionize everything, or getting some new insight into taking our thoughts out of the brain, which is Neuralink, what they're trying to do now, and they're starting to succeed at that. Yeah, academics a good place to do that. Academia is a good place to do that because sometimes it's free of commercial constraints, and that commercial constraints interfere with a lot of advancement of certain kinds of knowledge. If only the cigarette companies are doing research on tobacco, then you're not going to get the same research as if independent people are doing research on tobacco. So there's a very important place for that. But as a funnel that everybody has to go through to begin their life as an adult, and that's what we have today. We have this funnel. You got to go somewhere through that funnel, and maybe a long way or a little way, in order to be considered an adult and work as an adult. I think that's changing.
Thank you very much.
Marc, do you have anything to add, like any additional thoughts that you might think we shouldn't be missing today? Anything to add?
I think this was great. I really appreciate your doing it. I'm so happy to meet all of you people. If you had asked me, 2 years ago, would I have been very involved with people in Turkey, I would have said, what? And it turned out to be a great confluence of things. Even somebody I had met 10 years ago recontacted me. And so I think you should just keep doing what you're doing. I think you should try to connect everywhere in the world. I think you should publish whatever you conclude in ways that people in every language can access it. And now we're starting to see this. When I bring up a website that's in Turkish, it just asks me, English? You want the English version? I say yes, and then it comes up in English. You need these kind of things built in to all the things that you're doing. I think that I have for a long time thought about world conversations and how do you become part of not just a Turkish conversation, but a world conversation that's around this kind of stuff. We're getting more and more tools. I call those I have a new category for tools. I call it empotech, not edtech. I'm not interested in technology for advancing education for the reasons I told you. I'm interested in technology that empowers us to do more. And I think that the greatest example of empotech that I know is AI now. So so that's I encourage you to keep working, keep joining with others, keep cooking great Turkish food. I really enjoyed and I started to discover on this last trip that there's nuances in everything, right? You can get a kebab here and get a kebab there, and they're different. And if you if you listen to the young people, they'll tell you, yeah, and you don't have to pay all that money to get a good one, because that's what was our guide's name, Gulen, the student who guided us around Istanbul. Excuse me?
Berkay. His name was Berkay.
Yeah, Berkay, what he said to us, we had a delicious meal in a very touristy place because we happened to be next to that. And he said, you can get equally good or better if you were to come with me to these street places that I know about. So that's the kind of things that are happening in the world, the recalibration, the judgment. It doesn't have to have 3 stars and tablecloths to be a great restaurant. It doesn't have to, you don't have to have the terms, Dr. PhD, all this kind of stuff to be a wise person. All a lot of these things are changing, and we're recalibrating. And I thank you. What I'm going to thank you for this whole conversation is that word recalibration, which I hadn't used before. I think it's very appropriate. And how do you say recalibration in Turkish?
Tekrar bir araya gelme, something like that, or tekrar dayanışma. But Mark, I have to ask, there is one more question, but I know it has taken...
I literally, I have nothing else on my calendar today except writing. So I can do that anytime. So please take up all my time that you want to.
Then I appreciate your time, just sharing with us. So there is one more question here in the chat. Gülsüm Ekinci asking, she wonders what kind of relationship or hierarchy will there be among children when they grow up who cannot reach the advantaged digital age at the same speed due to their economic conditions?
Thank you for that question. It's a very important question. And it depends so much. That goes back to what we said before. It depends so much on the adults. Because if young people are brought up in a world where people don't see differences and people don't encourage differences, and that can happen in so many ways. Some kids just have 1 million toys, and some kids have no toys. Some kids have a real soccer ball. Some kids have a football. Some kids have a football made of plastic bags. And if they see that as meaningful, those differences as meaningful, that makes me better than you, or differences in race or nationality or language or anything. A lot of that seems to be going away in parts of this generation. I can't speak for the world, but in people I talk to a lot, particularly in America, they say young people are much more colorblind. That's the word they use, than they used to be. They just don't see race differences as meaningful, or skin color differences, let's say, as meaningful in ways that people used to. And that's just mostly adults passing the culture down here. Young people will come up with their own cultures, and some of it may be bad. And we have to sort of combat that. But one of the things that, for example, is really has always struck me is that a lot of times we spend time thinking we should teach our kids the arts, right? We should teach our kids about the history of music and the history of art and how to do it, and you know, both in terms of history and in terms of doing. And I'm not against that. I like it. But the only new art that's come out of the world in the, you know, in the past century almost is hip hop. That it's a dance, it's a music, it's a rap, it's a way of thinking, it's poetry, it's everything. And it's a whole, and it didn't grow out of the history. I mean, partially it did, but basically it was invented by young people. And I think that that's the kinds of things that we should encourage and look at. And one of the things that we can do now is any team, anytime we put more than one person together, they can be from different places. They can be from different genders. They can be from different races. They can be from, we live in a world where it's so much easier. They can communicate. They don't have to have language barriers. It's so much easier to start putting people together when they are very young, that if they experience that when they're very young, that's the way they will see the world. They see the world, okay, yeah, it's like that. If you go to school with people who look very different, you'll just expect, well, that's okay. The world is full of people who look very different. Go to school, people who look exactly the same way. That's what you'll grow up expecting. And that goes way beyond looks to thinking, to language, to all these kinds of things. I think there are some bad things in the world. There's bullying and stuff like that have always been in the world, but we can work to tamp those down. And in some places, the kids can tamp them down themselves. Like in Japan, the teachers don't resolve the kids' problems in a kindergarten classroom. The kids resolve their problems. And so it can be done very differently. And I'm optimistic. I look at the young people today with what they can do and how they can connect and how all those things, and it gives me a huge amount of optimism in the face of all the problems that we have put society through with from climate to destruction.
Great, then yeah. Seems like we don't have more questions. So I think that's about all we have time for today. And thank you again to Marc for being with us.
Give me half a second. David, your timing is perfect. I'll call you right back.
Okay.
Mobile? Okay, so good. So there's somebody I really want to talk to. You ended at exactly the right time. We are starting something that's called the Institute of Empowerment, Accomplishment, and Impact. And we hope you'll want to be part of that. And we will send you all that information as it evolves. And thank you again. Thank you, Turkey. Is that how I have to say it these days, Turkey?
It's okay.
There was a big decree, right? It came out of the government. We're not Turkey anymore. We're Turkey.
Yeah, big discussion on it.
Big discussion. So okay, I'll do whatever whatever makes people comfortable. But I am very happy for this group and for everybody who made the time to be here. And the offer that I make is, if you have a follow-up question, send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat.
Marc, we would like to thank you again for being with us, despite time zone differences, because Istanbul is 10 hours ahead of California, and I must say you are ahead of your time. So thank you for accepting our invitation, and to the audience for their questions and attention. And I must say, please keep an eye out for more communications from the Journal of Media Literacy Studies team. And you can watch this session, the record of this session on YouTube. And so thank you to everyone.
It's been my
Thank you.
pleasure.